All right. I think we are live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast. We're very excited to be here. I'm Catherine. I'm the communications manager at NaNoWriMo. And with me here today is Haley from ProWritingAid. And we're going to be talking about how to copy edit for clarity in your novel. This is part of our I wrote a novel, now what programming during January and February. Usually NaNoWriMo puts out a lot of resources for people who have just finished their drafts or, finished a first draft and want to know how to move forward and don't really know how to move forward with revision and editing because those are really hard things to do. So we like to have a lot of resources for you on revision and editing. And this is part of that. ProWritingAid is one of our generous and wonderful sponsors. And they also have a promotion running right now. So we'll put those links in the chat. But for now, Haley, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and about ProWritingAid?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. My name is Haley. I am the head of education of ProWritingAid. I've been part of the team there for about 4 years. And my work is really to, first of all, just tell everybody how awesome ProWritingAid is, and then also to come to events like these and talk a lot about copy editing and how to improve your manuscripts, both using ProWritingAid and not using ProWritingAid. So I am very excited to be here talking about copy editing because it is something I am incredibly passionate about. And with all of that said, I think we can just go ahead and dive in if that's cool. I will share my screen and we will get started. So today we are going to be talking about how to copy edit, and I am incredibly excited about this. As I just mentioned, my name is Haley and I am the head of education at ProWritingAid. It's the best job in the world. I get to talk about and think about writing all day long, which is just the best. Today, we're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to start by talking about why clarity is the most important goal for all writers. Then we'll talk about 5 key principles that can help make your writing more clear. And then finally, you will learn how to apply each of those principles to your writing in your copy editing phase to make your writing more effective. And I do want to highlight that since I'm from ProWritingAid, I will be talking about how ProWritingAid can help you with all of these principles, but I'll also be talking about how you can do them yourself. So whether or not you use ProWritingAid, you will be able to take what we talk about today and apply it to your writing. And I just want to first acknowledge that, coming into a conversation about copy editing is really exciting because I find editing is where a lot of the great writing really kind of comes out. It's where you can really come in and pay attention to your ideas, and you can pay attention to your words and your sentence structure and all of that type of stuff. And the copy editing phase is truly one of my favorites because it's where I find that in my own writing, I'm really able to kind of make my sentences shine and make sure I'm getting across my meaning in the most effective way possible to my readers. So really excited to talk about this today. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. So as I just mentioned, we are going to start by talking about clarity. So clarity is an essential part of storytelling. And that's because if your writing's not clear, it's not going to engage readers. And that's something we don't think a lot about when we are in the thick of writing. So when you're in the thick of November writing your novel, you're probably not thinking as much about how to structure your sentences effectively. You're probably thinking about hitting your word count, which is what I'm thinking about every single day. I'm just trying to get those words on the paper without necessarily thinking about the order of them, because I find personally, if I start thinking about too much about how my sentences are structured or anything like that, then my word count comes to a grinding halt. So for writers, as writers, the kind of first things we typically think about are getting those ideas on paper. And then it becomes thinking about how we can make those ideas, how we can communicate those ideas in the most effective way possible. And that at the end of the day is really our job as writers. Our main job is to get our meaning across clearly and effectively. And if our writing is too complicated or hard to follow, then we're not doing our job. So we could have the most engaging characters, the coolest setting, the coolest plot ever. But if we're not really focused on how those sentences are structured and how our writing is structured, then that's just not going to come across to readers. If our writing is unclear and if our sentences are ineffective, then our readers are going to spend more time trying to figure out what we're saying than engaging with those ideas. So while I know copy editing can feel very exhausting for a lot of people, it's really important because all of that time that you've spent thinking about and getting your ideas on paper, copy editing is where you really make sure readers will get to appreciate those. And the more you can set up your sentences effectively, the more likely it is that readers will get to know those great characters, will get to appreciate that setting. Because if you're not paying attention to your sentences, then they're probably going to check out. So as writers, clarity is an essential goal, and our goal is to make sure that we have good writing that prioritizes clearly communicating ideas over showing off fancy, confusing language. So what do I really mean when I'm talking about clarity? When I'm talking about clarity, I'm talking about three things. First, how easy your writing is to understand. Now, easy is subjective, and that goes into points 2 and 3. How easy your writing is to understand leads into whether or not your sentences are set up in a reader-focused way. So the first thing I want us to think about, and something key that I'll be talking about throughout this presentation, is that clarity is subjective. For all of us who are on this presentation, clarity will mean something very different to each of us and to each of our sets of readers, because we're all likely writing for different genres. So part of understanding what makes your writing clear or not clear is to really get clear on who your readers are and what would be clear for them. So we'll always be setting things up in the lens of our readers and thinking about our readers first and centering them in this conversation of clarity, because again, what's clear for a set of one readers is not clear for a set of others. So first, clarity is how easy your writing is to understand. Second, it's whether or not your sentences are set up in a reader-focused way. And again, what is reader-focused will change from writer to writer. It might even change from writing project to writing project. So if you are writing YA for one book and then you're writing adult for another, two different sets of readers, clarity will mean something different for each. And then finally, clarity is adding rich, specific language that will enhance your reader's understanding. So a lot of times, especially as I get into some of the tactics of creating clarity, people get very nervous that it means that I'm just taking all the personality away, or that we're just cutting sentences to make them very, very simple, which is not true. Clarity is about setting up sentences simply, but it's also about using rich and simple language to add rich and specific language and simple language to add to your reader's understanding. So it's not just one or the other. Clarity is not just cutting, making simpler and simpler. It's also effectively choosing rich and specific language to make your writing more effective. So on the other hand, clarity has nothing to do at all with how simple or juvenile the ideas in your writing are. So you can write clearly if you are writing for an advanced academic audience. You can write clearly if you are writing for kindergarteners. Either way, clarity is incredibly important. So all ideas can have clear prose that accompanies them. I would actually argue that the more complex and the more adult your ideas are, it's probably even more important to prioritize clarity, because you want to make sure those ideas are getting across correctly. So clarity has nothing to do with the ideas and how simple or juvenile they are. It also has nothing to do with whether or not your prose is engaging, unique, and exciting. Again, clarity is not about just cutting. It's not about making everything sound the same at all. It's about making sure that your ideas are communicated effectively. And you can communicate those. You have a lot of room to play around with kind of how those ideas are connected while still being clear. So how do we get to clarity? Clarity starts with your sentences, basically copy editing. So looking closely at your sentences. That's because sentences are like mini movies. Sentences are almost a complete story in themselves. You can think of each sentence as almost a mini movie your reader is playing in their head. So if I said, Haley's cat walked across the desk, which might happen. If you closed your eyes, you could probably picture a cat walking across this desk, right? That's like a mini movie. It's something that gives you kind of a complete idea. If I changed Haley to, Patrick or something like that, again, your vision of what's happening would change, right? So each sentence is in itself a self-contained kind of mini movie your writer is playing. That's why we have to start at the sentence level to create clarity. When we have clear sentences, we will have clear paragraphs, and then we will have clear stories. Our stories don't really stand a chance of being clear if our sentences themselves are a bit messy or a bit hard to get through. So we have to make sure that we have clear sentences in order to get to clear stories. So how do we write clear sentences? There are 5 principles that I think are most important to prioritize when writing clearly. The first principle is to make your subject your stars of your sentence, make subjects your stars of your sentences. To reduce glue words is number 2. Using powerful verbs is the third principle. The fourth is to target correct readability. And the fifth is to choose specific words. I'm going to go into each of these in more detail in just a second, but these are the 5 main things that you should focus on when trying to copy edit for clarity. Now, as I get into each of the principles, again, I'm going to highlight what the principle is and why it's so important. And then I'm going to show you how ProWritingAid can help you effectively enact this principle, but I'll also show you how to do it without ProWritingAid. So if you don't have the software, don't worry. Though if you are interested in getting it, again, there is a good deal going on right now for everyone watching this webcast. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into principle 1. So principle 1 is to make your subjects stars. So what does that mean? Subjects are the stars of your sentences. They are the main actors in your text, and it's important to prioritize them by treating them like the stars, which basically means you shouldn't be hiding them. If you've written a sentence with passive voice, that means that you've hidden your subject in most instances because you put the object of your sentence before the subject of your sentence. Doing so takes the power away from your subjects. So here is an example of a passive voice sentence. The present was opened by Jane. And you can see in this slide that there's kind of a visual representation of the sentence. Because the present is like the first thing in the sentence, that is the thing that becomes clear. That is the thing that our focus is drawn to. Jane is all the way at the end of the sentence. So in this image, she's kind of in the back. She's not as important. Now, this is a very, very simple sentence. It's just, 6 words or so. So our understanding is not going to get in the way. We're still going to have probably an accurate picture. But the more complicated your sentences get, the more passive voice can take power away from those subjects and make your sentences more ineffective. Passive voice often negatively affects readers because it's wordy and confusing, right? Again, the present is opened by Jane is not a very long sentence, so it's not going to truly get in the way of too many people's understanding. But again, the more complicated your sentence is, the more passive voice can negatively affect reader understanding. Now, passive voice, as I just mentioned, is often too wordy and too confusing for what you're trying to get across. But that being said, it is not grammatically incorrect. So the present was opened by Jane is a perfectly fine sentence. If you typed it in Microsoft Word, it would be totally fine. It is grammatically correct, which means that in certain instances, it is okay to use passive voice. It's just important to choose when. So this is something else that I'll be talking about throughout this presentation. All of the principles that I'm talking about today are not grammatically incorrect. So none of them will flag in a typical grammar checker or a typical spell checker in like Google Docs or Word or anything like that. And again, they're not grammatically incorrect. However, many of them are bad habits that we as writers fall back into it, particularly if we're writing really quickly. So during the copy editing phase, it's important to keep your eye out for these principles and to choose when they exist or when to keep them and when not. So I'm not by any means saying that you should get rid of every instance of passive voice in your writing. However, you want to go through during the copy editing process and think critically about what instances of passive voice you want to keep and which instances of passive voice you want to get rid of. So here are 3 examples of times you might want to keep passive voice. So first is when the subject of your sentence is unknown. So a sentence like Stonehenge was built 5,000 years ago, around 5,000 years ago. In that sentence, we don't know who built Stonehenge. So it's okay to use passive voice because we don't need to make the subject a star since it's not the star, right? We don't know. You could also use passive voice if the subject is irrelevant. So in this example, the Time and Life building was constructed in 1959 and changed the skyline. Here, it doesn't really matter who constructed the Time and Life building because the more important idea of this whole sentence is that the building changed the skyline, right? So we need to keep thinking about when we want to use passive voice and what we're trying to get across. You might also choose to use passive voice deliberately if you are trying to hide something or purposely obscure the subject. So in a mystery novel, or something where somebody has a mysterious package left on their door and that character isn't aware of who left it, passive voice might be the right sentence construction because it's purposely obscuring the subject for a reason. So again, we don't need to eliminate all instances of passive voice, but we do need to choose specifically when to use it or when not to use it. If you're just kind of leaving it in, it tends to be a bad habit that, at least in some instances, will mean that your sentences are overly wordy and confusing. By eliminating that and just choosing when to keep it in one of these instances, it'll make your sentences more effective. So here's how to fix a sentence with passive voice. Instead of saying the present was opened by Jane, you switch to Jane opens the present, where you can see here, again, Jane is now the star of this, the star of this image, as opposed to the present being forward. So as I mentioned, I'm going to show you how to fix it with ProWritingAid in just a second, but to fix instances of passive voice yourself, there are a couple things you can do. First, looking for the word by is a good indication that you have used passive voice, either if it's in the sentence itself or if the sentence would be made clearer by adding the phrase by blank. So the present was opened by Jane. Stonehenge was built by aliens, whoever built Stonehenge, right? If you're using the word by, that's a good indication you have a passive voice sentence. You can also look for to be plus verb. So was opened could be an instance of passive voice. And if you found an instance of passive voice in your writing, you simply have to swap that sentence around by putting the doer, the subject first, making them the star. So not the present was opened by Jane, Jane opens the present. So that is how you can fix it yourself. But let's take a look at how you can fix it with ProWritingAid. So I am in ProWritingAid's web editor right now, and I am going to look for an instance of passive voice. I actually don't know if I have one in this. Well, I have a couple in this, but they have some other examples. So I am in ProWritingAid's web editor right now, as I just mentioned, and I am going to take a look for instances of passive voice. I have one right here. So ProWritingAid does a number of things with passive voice. In certain instances like this one, it will just find an instance of passive voice and let you know. It'll typically do this in the sentence construction that's a little bit more complicated, that might require you to rewrite some more difficult things. However, there are also in kind of simple instances of passive voice. So let me see if I can type that example we just had. Give it a second. So you can see that ProWritingAid can also just fix it for you. So if it's a more complicated sentence structure, it sometimes will just tell you that it's an instance of passive voice, and then you can rewrite the sentence yourself. If it's a more simple sentence structure, it will highlight the instance of passive voice, and then it will also suggest a potential fix for it. Now, this is really helpful, so you don't have to go through your document and find all the places where you've used to be verb, to be plus verb, or the word by. It'll highlight all of those for you. I have ProWritingAid's real-time checker on right now. Passive voice is one of the three things that is searched for in the real-time checker. And then you can also find it in the style report here, which will highlight passive verbs. And then you can also find it in your goals panel over here on the right-hand side. Now I'm going to show you the goals panel because I think it's one of the best features for writing. The goals panel lets you customize your document type and receive suggestions based on your particular document type. So like I mentioned when we were talking about passive voice, you do not need to remove all instances of passive voice in your writing. However, you might want to remove some, particularly if it's a bad habit. The goals tracker, the goals sidebar is really effective because it actually tells you if you're in a good range for your document type or not. So these little bars kind of tell you what your range is. And then if you are in the green within the bar, then you're fine. And you could probably ignore your passive voice or come back to it a little bit later. However, if you are really far outside of the bar, that might be an area you want to take a look at. So for passive voice here, I think we only found 2 instances in this document. So if I was using ProWritingAid's Copyedit, I might not use them, or I might not focus on those first. I might come back to them later. But either way, the tool finds instances of passive voice for you, tells you where you match up, again, based on your document's specific type. This was a fantasy document, but now it's just kind of general fiction. So the bands will change a little bit, though I doubt the passive voice one will because it's still fiction. But either way, you can find instances of passive voice. And then again, you can either see them or you can click into one and then just click and it rewrites it for you. Now, a couple other things that I want to highlight quickly with the tool while we're here is this little orange eye button. So if you ever have an instance of a suggestion from ProWritingAid that you're not quite sure about, you can open up the suggestion and click the orange eye, which will pop up into these articles and videos that tell you more about what the suggestion is, which helps you figure out whether or not you should make it. So again, most of the suggestions in ProWritingAid are just that, they're suggestions. So if you ever have something that you're not quite sure, whether or not you should accept it or ignore it, clicking this orange eye will give you more information and help you make that choice yourself. Okay, moving on to our second principle, which is my favorite. So our second principle of good writing is to reduce glue words. When you're writing, you should prioritize working words over glue words. What are those? So working words are words that contain a sentence's most essential information. You can't change them or the meaning of the sentence will change. These are words like nouns and verbs. So before I said something like, Haley's cat ran across the desk. If I changed cat to dog, that would change the sentence. If I changed desk to couch, that would change the meaning of the sentence. If I changed Haley to Patrick, that would change the meaning of the sentence. If I changed ran to sat on the desk, that would change the meaning of the sentence. Again, all of these things might happen during this presentation. We'll see. But the goal with working words is that the important thing to remember about working words is that they are the words that contain the sentence's most essential information. You can't change them or the sentence will change. The rest of the words in a sentence are glue words. These are words that are also necessary to make the sentence exist and to make it make sense. But their job is to make the essential sentence stick together. You can typically reduce, remove, or replace glue words to make the sentence more effective while still retaining that same meaning. If you have too many glue words in your sentence, the sentence is going to become sticky. So here's an example of a sticky sentence. Dave walked over into the backyard of the school to see if there was a new bicycle that he could use in his class. So this sentence, like all sentences, has both working words and glue words in it. The working words in this sentence are words like Dave, school, bicycle, class. If I changed Dave to Haley, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I changed school to hospital, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I changed bicycle to roller skates, it would change. Class to, crime or something that he could use in his crime, that would change, right? All of these words are words that are essential to the meaning of the sentence, right? We cannot change them or the meaning of the sentence would change. That means that every other word in this sentence that's not highlighted, those words are are glue words. They are there to make the sentence make sense and stick together, but you can see we have a lot of those glue words, which means the sentence is kind of overstuffed. Our proportion is off. Our proportion of working to glue words is off. Sorry, I live near a fire building, so there's a fire truck going by. Give it a second. So in order to make the sentence more effective, we can reduce some of these glue words to make the sentence clearer and easier. How do we do that? Well, there isn't one way to fix a sticky sentence, which is both good and bad news. It's good news because it means that all of our writing is not going to sound exactly the same. Our writing will sound different because each and every one of us watching this webcast can likely think of a different way to rewrite this sticky sentence I was just showing you while still retaining the meaning. It's bad news because it means that as a writer, you then have to do a lot of the work to fix the sentence yourself. So if we have this sentence, Dave walked over into the backyard of the school in order to see if there was a new bicycle he could use in class, let's try to rewrite it. So what I came up with was Dave checked the school's backyard for a new bicycle to use in class. We have the exact same sentence, the exact same meaning. You're picturing the same thing, Dave going to the school's backyard looking for a bicycle for class. However, our sentence has become much clearer and much more effective. That's what sticky sentences are all about. It is going in and determining your ratio of working words, again, those words that contain the essential information, to glue words, and trying to, in sentences where that balance is off, remove some of those glue words to make your sentence as clear and to the point as possible so that your reader is not getting stuck trying to wade through that sentence. So what do you do to fix sticky sentences yourself? The first thing you need to do is look for sentences that are overly long. So something that is 18 words or over, again, depending on your genre, if you are in your age group, if you're writing for children, 18 words is definitely too long. If you're writing for adults, something that 17 or 18 words might fly, but it kind of depends on your audience. But typically look for sentences that are too long. Anything over 18 words is a safe bet that it's probably too long, regardless of age group. Once you've identified sentences like that, look for glue words. Again, working words are the words that contain the most essential information. Glue words are everything else that's left over. So words like prepositions, conjunctions, articles, those are typically glue words. And once you've identified those, you can reduce those glue words, to rewrite the sentence to make it clearer. Again, remember, there is not one way to fix a sticky sentence. So looking at the sentence, determining its meaning, and then deciding what's the best way to rewrite that will get you to a clearer sentence. Sometimes that means chopping a sentence in half. Sometimes that means eliminating a lot of words and kind of cutting those out. Every single instance of fixing a sticky sentence can be different, and there's many ways to fix each. ProWritingAid does make it much easier by identifying your sticky sentences for you. So ProWritingAid goes in and finds all of the sticky and semi-sticky sentences in your writing, and it also gives you your overall document glue index. So I'm in the sticky sentences check right now, but if I go back to the real-time checker, if I go back to the goal sidebar that I was showing you before in the real-time checker, you'll also see glue index here. So you can see that for my document type, I'm outside of the glue index that's recommended. I am at 46%. And for this particular document type, it recommends a score less than 40. So my goal will be to reduce some of these glue words and get here into this band. Now I can do that by going to the sticky sentences check and finding my sticky and semi-sticky sentences. So sticky sentences are sentences that have 60% or higher glue words. Those are the ones that you definitely want to fix. Whereas semi-sticky is between 40 and 60. And those are ones that you might want to fix. Again, if you were in the kind of target range of up to 40%, you might decide to just leave a sentence there, or you can go in and try to eliminate them. Now, the other thing that ProWritingAid makes really helpful is it comes and it tells you exactly what the glue words are. So you can figure out how to rewrite those sentences, taking out some of those glue words, or you can figure out if you're repeating yourself with any of those. It just gives you a really nice and easy way to come in, see what those kind of problematic sentences are, see what the words are in those sentences that you can reduce, remove, or replace, and then you can keep moving with your writing. So this is a big bad habit of mine, and it's really helpful to be able to see where are the places that I'm being overly wordy and where can I kind of tighten it up to make it more effective. All right, let's move on to principle 3. So our third principle of effective writing is to use powerful verbs. That is because verbs are the engines of our writing, but unfortunately, many writers fall into the habit of using weak verbs, which takes power away from their writing. They do this in a couple of ways. The first way is through a process called nominalization, which is basically hiding the verb. So here's an example of a nominalization. Instead of saying, we will announce the winner on Friday, saying we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday, that is called hiding the verb. The real thing that you're doing here is announcing, and announce is a verb on its own. But by turning this into a phrase, we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday, you're really making the sentence longer, less effective. And again, you're taking away the power from the verb and hiding it behind something that is less powerful. So make is a less effective, less unique verb than announce. So this nominalization process takes some of that power away from your verb. So that's one way writers tend to hide verbs. The other is by using weak verbs with adverbs or words like very in a place of a strong verb. So instead of saying something like I dashed, saying I ran quickly, using an adverb to modify that verb tends to be another bad habit of many writers. as a writer, you should try to let your verbs power your writing the same way we tried to make our subjects the stars. The more effort you can put into using powerful verbs that say what you truly mean and get your meaning across, the more effective and energetic your writing will be. So there's a couple ways you can do this. The first is by removing nominalizations. So instead of saying something like, I'll make a decision tomorrow, I'll decide tomorrow. I will make an announcement on Friday, I will announce on Friday. Taking those places where you have hidden the verb and prioritizing that actual verb phrase is one way to kind of show the verb and give power back to it. Another is by using strong verbs in place of places where you have adverbs. So if you have said, I ran very quickly, instead saying I dashed, right? Changing to a stronger verb is going to make your writing more unique, more energetic, and more exciting. Particularly finding strong verb or finding places where you've used adverbs that you could use stronger verbs instead. You can look for words like very. That's a good indication that you've used an adverb. But you can also look for words that end in ly. That will help with both of those instances. And as should be no surprise, ProWritingAid can also help you with that. So nominalizations, it does a couple of different things for. Let's see if there's a nominalization in here. Oh, here's one. So she made the decision to update her resume. Instead, you could say she decided, right? That is a clearer and more effective way to say that same exact thing. Instead of saying made the decision, hiding that verb, we changed it, right? So it'll find instances like that so that you can switch them. It'll also find places where you have used adverbs in relationship to particularly to dialogue, which is really helpful, as well as places where you've used adverbs to make your either verbs or adjectives less effective. So we have very cold air here, right? So we have very cold, which is an adverb phrase where we're kind of taking some of the power away from that adjective. We could change it to frosty, icy, or frigid, right? Or anything else that you would like as well. But ProWritingAid will help you find both where you've used adverbs that take away from your adjectives, as well as adverbs that take away from the power of your verbs. And it will often suggest improvements that will make the writing just say more about what you actually mean, which again is very, very helpful. All right, our fourth principle of clarity is to target the correct readability. So audiences prefer works that are easy to read. And again, easy to read is very subjective, which we'll talk about in a second. So what does it mean to write something that is readable? There are three kind of key things that I think about. The first is that ideas are the stars of your writing. When your work is readable, that means your ideas shine. So your audiences are worrying less about like word choice and going back to the beginning of the sentence to try to figure out what you actually said, and more focused on your ideas themselves, right? We don't want our audiences to have to sit with a dictionary next to them to understand what we're trying to say. Our goal is to have them engage with our ideas, right? And those ideas can be very complicated, but the goal should be engagement with the ideas, not engagement with the word choice. That does not mean, however, that you have to forego all interesting words. You should just be choosy. So as a writer, you should make sure that you are choosing the words you use carefully. You do not have to use all simple words, but you need to make sure that the interesting words or the more complicated words that you do pick are there for a reason. Now, I often like to talk at this point about kind of an anecdotal story about this. So I used to be a teacher, and as a teacher, I was writing a lot of assessments. And when you write assessments, you have to be incredibly careful about word choice because one word could really, really drastically increase the readability of a sentence, right? So if I was writing a science assessment for fifth graders or something like that, I had to be very, very careful about the words I picked to make the sentence not at a seventh grade reading level or eighth grade reading level because they're fifth graders, right? They're not supposed to read at that level. Now, if I was writing a science assessment, that would sometimes mean that I would need to use a more complicated word, something like biodiversity or something like that. And I could use those as long as I made everything around that word simpler. So Applying that to our writing, that means that you can use interesting, complex, domain-specific vocabulary. You just need to make sure that you're using it when it counts. So if you're writing science fiction, use domain-specific vocabulary, to describe the ship that your readers are on, or like the time travel, or the city structure, or something like that. But you don't necessarily need to use that in every single sentence. So do not forgo all interesting vocabulary. Just be choosy about when you use it. That also ties into our third point, which is that readability is dependent on your audience. Every single audience is different, so consider yours when targeting readability. Now, if you're writing mass market fiction, most mass market fiction books are published at about 7th to 8th grade US reading level, which is 12 to 13-year-olds. So you want to think about, is your prose something that 12 to 13-year-olds could understand? It has nothing to do with the ideas and whether it's appropriate for them or not, but are the sentences set up in a way that a 12 to 13-year-old could understand that, right? Now, if you're writing a dissertation, you could have a much more advanced readability score because you're writing for a much different audience in a much different capacity. So consider your audience when you're applying readability scores, because again, it's going to depend on who your audience is and what they might understand. So readability means three things. One, again, your ideas are the stars. Your audience is focused on the ideas and not your word choice. Two, that you are using, interesting domain-specific words, but you're doing those carefully. You're kind of making those choices consciously, as opposed to just throwing a bunch of words in there. And three, you're taking into account what your specific audience will understand, and what they will find readable versus, again, just kind of making a guess at that. So readability does not mean, on the other hand, that your prose is boring. Again, like I just talked about, you can use unique words and structures. Just do it consciously. Make sure it's not just a bad habit. It's there for a reason. And then it also does not mean that your writing is dumbed down. Like I said, most mass market fiction is written at a reading level that a 12 to 13-year-old could understand. That does not mean the ideas in there are appropriate for a 12 to 13-year-old. It's two different things. Sentence structure, word choice are separate from ideas. So you can have very mature, complex kind of adult ideas without having complicated language, while having simple, clear language. So it's both of those. So think about both of those things when you're talking about readability. Now, how do you find this? The easiest way to understand the readability of your document, actually really the only way, is to use something called a readability score. A readability score predicts who will be able to read your writing. And there are many types to choose from, and they are all free, or a lot of them are free, which is great. A readability score basically predicts who will be able to read your writing. Some common ones are Dale Shaw, Flesch Kincaid. All of them kind of spit numbers out in like a fancy, complicated way, but basically it just boils down to telling you who would be able to read your writing. And when you put your document that you're working on into a readability checker, whether that is built into Microsoft Word or another tool you're using, or if you're using a free one online, again, you can match up with, who is my audience, and is this readability score something that they would enjoy working with. If you have a readability score that is too high, here are 4 things you can do to fix it. First and foremost is use easier vocabulary. So one word could drastically increase a readability score, particularly if your document is shorter. So look at your vocabulary, see if there are words that you can change up, words that you can make easier. That'll be a good way to bring your readability score down. You can also look at shortening your sentences. The longer the sentence, typically the harder the readability score. So something like, those sticky sentences we were talking about that are 18 words or longer, those will make the readability score higher. So the shorter the sentences, typically the more readable they are. Removing jargon and domain-specific language is another way to make your readability score lower. And then passive voice. Passive voice typically makes your readability score higher because it's a longer sentence, right? The present was opened by Jane was a longer sentence than Jane opens the present, right? More complicated as well. So using active voice can also bring your readability down. But again, think about who your audience is, run the readability checker and see, is this in the kind of the zone of what I'm going for? And again, if you're writing mass market fiction, it's going to be lower than you typically think. Again, 7th grade US, which is around 12 years old, that's the typical readability score that most mass market fiction is written at. So just because you're writing for adults and it says, oh, like it's, at a 12th grade or college level reading level, that is not if you're writing mass market fiction, that's probably too high. So you probably need to bring it down. But again, considering what your readability is and your specific audience will help you get at the right score for you. Okay, ProWritingAid has a couple ways to fix this, and I'm just laughing at everyone in the chat who said they calculated readability by hand. That would be so challenging. I'm very glad I do not need to do that, and that there's so many great tools out there, because that's a lot of work, particularly if you're doing a really long document. So more power to you. ProWritingAid makes it super, super simple in addition to all of those readability checks. So I'll walk you through a couple of them. First, the document will give you a readability grade for your specific document type. And as you can see, we have documents like academic in here, which switches, this is not an academic document, but it would switch the reading level. So if you're somebody who writes in different contexts, being able to switch between them is really helpful. So you can see, where am I for my particular grade? So that's one thing that's really helpful. As I mentioned before, both the sticky sentences and passive voice checks will help you get down to a better readability score as well. And then let me see if I have a good readability. I've got some redundancy. Let me see if I have any readability enhancements. Okay. So yes, some of the readability enhancements will be by, again, making your sentences more effective. So something like started making, just being made, that's going to improve your readability because it's going to make it more effective. It'll also see places where you can just like cut things out. Oftentimes cutting out adverbs or cutting out places where you've used something at the beginning of the sentence can make your sentence more effective. It'll also find kind of stylistic places where you can make things easier to read. So there's a lot of different ways that you can improve readability. And you can also go in and see your overall document readability score, as well as a breakdown paragraph by paragraph, if you would like to get that granular. So you can see, okay, we've got one difficult to read paragraph, one slightly difficult to read paragraph, and then everything else is easy to read. So you can break it down at a number of different levels. And then finally, if you have some really complicated words in here, you can also use the thesaurus check to find other ways to say it that might be easier if you're looking to bring down readability. So lots of ways to improve it with ProWritingAid. Okay, and our final principle is to choose specific words. So I've talked so far about cutting, about eliminating passive voice, about choosing better verbs, about getting out adverbs, getting out glue words, all that type of thing. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about adding and being specific. So as a writer, we should not only be simple, but we also need to be specific. Vague words are going to lack the specificity that our readers need to really engage with our writing and to understand it, honestly. So here is an example of a vague sentence. Kate made some improvements to her cabin and now it's worth more. This could be anything. I'm sure that all of us watching this have very different ideas of what some improvements are. I do not own a home and I'm not handy at all. So some improvements to me is like I cleaned it up a little bit. And worth more, because I don't own anything and I'm a millennial, worth more is like $100, right? Whereas my mom is an architect. So making some improvements to a house means like completely redesigning the kitchen and like adding in built floor to ceiling built-in shelves, right? We have very different ideas. And worth more to her is something very different than worth more to me, right? So this sentence is too vague. It's not grammatically incorrect, but it doesn't tell us anything. If we go back to that principle that a sentence is like a movie, every one of us is probably playing a very different movie based on our own kind of biases and what we're bringing to that. Some instances that might be fine, but if you're trying to get a clear idea across to your readers, it's important to be specific so that that movie they're playing is actually what you mean it to be. So a better way to say this is Kate replaced the bathroom suite, repainted the living room, and laid hardwood floors in her cabin, increasing its value by 10%. Now we know exactly what Kate did. We know exactly what being worth more means. And for the most part, the movies that all of us are going to be playing are much more similar than the movies on the previous slide. We might have some differences in our movies in terms of like what the bathroom suite is and what the paint is and all that type of stuff. But overall, the understanding of what Kate's actions are and again, how it affects her house are much more aligned in the second sentence than in the first. Now, what I also want you to notice is that that second sentence is much longer. So clarity does not always equal brevity. Sometimes it does, but sometimes clarity means being more specific and making your sentence longer to make sure your point is getting across. So we've talked a lot about cutting. We've talked a lot about making your sentences simpler, but it's not always one or the other. Sometimes clarity means making your sentence longer in order to get your point across. And part of that is because that sentence that we just talked about has very few glue words. So I couldn't change bathroom suite to kitchen suite because that would change the meaning of the sentence. I couldn't change living room to bedroom because it would change the meaning of the sentence. I couldn't change repainted to expanded, right? A lot of the words in this sentence are working words, which is an indication that the sentence is specific and that all of the words are there for a reason. We could go into, should we cut this sentence in two, or, all of that type of stuff. But at its core, this is a sentence full of working words where each of the words are there for a specific purpose to give our reader a specific. So again, it's not always about cutting, being briefer. Sometimes it's about adding more words to make sure those words are as specific as possible. And a good way to think about that is by checking to make sure that those words are working words. So one of the ways that you can fix this yourself is by reading through a passage that you've just written and asking yourself, is the movie a reader playing in their head, or a movie the reader could play in their head, accurate to what I'm trying to show? You could also ask another reader this. So you could have them read a passage that you've written and see if they're picturing the same thing you are, right? If that movie, it's a good indication that you are not specific enough, and you need to go back into your writing to take a look at your words to make them more effective. Now, ProWritingAid has a couple of ways to do this. They have an overused words check, which will help you find some of the words like very that are overused and can make your writing less effective. And then the diction report will find vague and abstract words that you can come in and make more effective. So something like beauty can be kind of abstract because it's not specific enough. And so again, it'll highlight words like some, which often are not as clear enough or as clear as what you need them to be to make your writing more effective. So again, this is something that it's not grammatically incorrect, but it can drastically get in the way of your reader's understanding. So fixing that can make it more effective. Okay, and with all that being said, as we wrap up and get into questions, today we did 3 things. We talked about why clarity, first and foremost, is the most important goal for all writers. We talked about our 5 key principles to make your writing more clear. As a quick recap, those were to make your subjects your stars, to reduce glue words, to use powerful verbs, to target the appropriate readability for your audience, and to choose specific words. And then finally, we talked about how to apply those principles to your writing. For each of those, we talked about some ways you can do it yourself, as well as some ways that ProWritingAid can help you do it more easily. So with all of that being said, I am happy to answer some questions if anyone has any. I think Catherine said, yeah, the free sample for ProWritingAid, yes. Now you know what a sticky sentence is. So yes, that is what a sticky sentence is. It has too many glue words that can get in the way of your understanding.
I know there were some people in the chat that were saying like, oh yeah, this is stuff that like maybe I learned in, in middle school or something. And it's like, oh yeah, these are things that I learned, but I kind of feel like some of them are things that you learned once and then you never really thought about again. So yes. Yes. I'm curious if using ProWritingAid, because as you were going through this, I was like, oh yeah, that like if using the software has impacted your writing at all. Like, do you find yourself noticing those things more like when you write your first draft?
I actually do, which I think is one of the the hidden benefits of the software is that I now, especially like nominalizations, places where I'll say like, she'll make an announcement or something like that. I tend to do that all the time. And it's partly because I want to be like very polite in my language. And so I'll just say things that are kind of hiding what I mean. And so I'll hear that. And then I'll also, a lot of the like readability and style enhancements, it's been really helpful reminding me about. And then some other things. For me, another one of my bad fiction writing habits is to use, this is the wrong report, is to use adverbs with dialogue. So that's really helped me as well, which is a bad habit that I have. So it really helps me kind of think through those. Just looking at the chat quickly. So Catherine asked, does the full product highlight overused words? So yes, it does. ProWritingAid has a couple different options. The free version, which is the web editor, which is what I have here, can check up to 500 words with all of these reports. So you could, in theory, check 500 words at a time. If you use the premium version, then you can check unlimited amounts of words, and you also get a bunch of different apps and stuff like that too. Phyllis asked, would it be useful for nonfiction writing? Yes. So Phyllis, this is a fiction sample, but I have, oh, actually, this is just a fiction sample, but yes, I use it on nonfiction all the time. I use it on blog articles I write. I've used it on academic papers that I do for my master's program. I've done it for that as well. So all over, yes, all document types. And if we go, oops, I keep clicking the wrong button. But if we go into our goals sidebar here, you can see a bunch of different document types. So academic, business, technical writing, casual, creative, web script. There's a bunch of different ones in kind of all of these. So, you could use it for a CV, for a business, job description, marketing text, critique, academic essay, etc. All those types of options. So Nancy, no, the city was only a mile in diameter is not passive voice. So you are okay there. Lois asked about examples of glue words. So glue words, Lois, are found in the sticky sentences check. And here it'll highlight the sentences that are sticky or semi-sticky, and then it'll show the glue words. And glue words are the 200 or so most common words in the English language that are, again, typically articles, prepositions, conjunctions, that type of thing. Readability score websites free to use. Candace, it depends on the readability checker, but there are free ones out there for sure. So if you can't afford ProWritingAid or another similar tool, if you just Google free readability checker, you should be able to find some. Yeah, Catherine, I think using a grammar checker or using an editing tool, it really does help polish your style. And like we were just talking about, it really does help you become more attentive to some of your bad habits, particularly. Like another one of my bad habits is repeating myself. And so the repeats and echoes checks are ones that I use. I use echoes all the time because again, in fiction writing, I will get something in my head. I'll be like, oh, his turquoise eyes. And then I'll use the word turquoise like 40 times on a page. And then this will be like, hey, you've used turquoise 40 times. Let's change it up. It just kind of makes me more attentive. And so then it makes me better from the first time I write as well, which is really great.
Yeah, that's great. I was just thinking that it's kind of, it's a little bit like having feedback from a writing group or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, I know they're going to get onto me if I do this thing that I always do.
Exactly. Yeah. And that being said, I know sometimes people ask about how I use ProWritingAid in my writing process. And if it's overwhelming to use. And so I would say, depending on what you're writing and depending on what I write, I use it at different points. So I am very precious about fiction writing and I can't handle having the feedback live. So I write it separately and then take it to ProWritingAid when I'm ready for ProWritingAid to tell me what to fix. I care a lot less about an email. So when I'm writing an email, ProWritingAid is there, it's on in real time telling me how to fix that email or a blog post kind of in the moment. But you can turn it on and off. So you can use it in different ways, depending on where you're writing or what you're writing. So again, if you're working on something longer form, like a book, you can use it, chapter by chapter or page by page, and you can use it while you're writing or after you're writing, while you're editing. There's a lot of kind of different ways that you can use it.
We're getting up toward the end of the webcast here. So I just want, if anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. And I do just want to remind people, I'll put it in the chat, but all the links that we have shared today and are talking about will be available in the video description. And if there's anything that you want to go back and look more closely at, the video will be available forever for as long as YouTube is around at this same link. So if you're like, oh, I want to go back and learn more about passive voice, you can go back and watch it. And I'll put this link here again in the chat to the ProWritingAid promotion that's going on. In case you want to try out the pro version, there's a discount for NaNoWriMo writers. So
Yeah, and just one other quick thing before we end. Next week is Fantasy Writers Week at ProWritingAid. It'll be great for fantasy writers, but also there's going to be a lot of really amazing content, even if you don't write fantasy. So feel free to come to go.prowritingaid.com/fantasy to register. It's totally free. There are about 20 different sessions. And if you can't come live, all of the sessions are available via replay, so you don't have to come live. We have V.E. Schwab and Tomi Adeyemi coming to speak, who are both absolutely fantastic, 2 #1 New York Times bestsellers, as well as a number of other award-winning authors, USA bestsellers, and then just folks who are focused on things like how to develop a great scene, how to build a fantastic world. It's going to be really, really fun. And then we also have daily networking events and just a lot of really fun tips. So please feel free to come register. Again, the link is just in the chat, go.prowritingaid.com/fantasy, totally free, and replays are available if you can't make it live too. We'd love to see you there.
That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah.
I write fantasy, so I'm like, ooh, yes.
Yeah, you should come. Like, truly come. It's
awesome. I will.
Somebody on Twitter was like, is it a scam? And I was like, no, it's like, just come and you can just show up later and watch the videos. They'll be great. So yeah, it truly is just a free week of really awesome fantasy writers talking about fantasy, which is the best thing in the world.
Sounds wonderful. Cool. So we don't have any more questions in the chat, but please check out ProWritingAid, and you can look at all of the other editing resources that we have on NaNoWriMo's Now What page. We're doing a few more events throughout the end of this month. And I also just want to do a little plug. This weekend is Project for Awesome. If you guys know about that, it's John and Hank Green, the Vlog brothers. They raise a bunch of money to give to nonprofits, and NaNoWriMo has gotten a lot of grants from them in the past few years. So there'll be a big thing this weekend where you can basically just go vote on YouTube videos, and NaNoWriMo might get a grant from them. So keep an eye out. We've got lots of fun things coming up, and definitely check out that ProWritingAid link and Fantasy Week. Haley, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was glad to be here.
All right, everyone. We'll see you later. Thanks for joining.
Bye.